Greetings, Professor Cueva and fellow classmates. My name is Nicholas Haynes, and welcome to my presentation of my research project on the similarities between the Peloponnesian War and the Russo-Ukrainian War. My core thesis on this topic is that these wars share similarities in the historical hostilities between the belligerents in each conflict, the origins and cultures of the belligerents between themselves and their counterparts, and lastly, the way these wars were covered by the correspondence of their respective time periods. First, let's discuss the similarities in the pre-existing hostilities between the respective combatants in these two wars, starting with the ancient Greek city-states of Sparta and Athens. These two great powers within Greece would develop different systems of government, with Sparta becoming a military oligarchy and Athens the birthplace of democracy. Athens would see the rise of tyrants as well as the reforms of Solon, additionally dealing with Spartan incursions into their affairs during the rule of Hippias and Isagoras. The First Peloponnesian War would come as a result of the Athenians reconstructing and manning a defensive wall between Attica and Peloponnese, ruled respectively by Athens and Sparta, despite Sparta's vocal opposition to this action. This, coupled with Athens reneging on a promise to aid Sparta in suppressing a Helot slave revolt, would lead to the Spartans in declaring a preemptive war against the Athenians. The Slavic nations of Russia and Ukraine have similar historical animosity towards one another, despite their shared Slavic background. In the early 20th century, Ukraine endured three major famines, with the second occurring from 1932 to 1933 being of particular note. During this famine, Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, while pursuing the Bolshevik doctrine of forced collectivization of farms, would send Russian troops to Ukraine during the famine to seize all food throughout the country and lock it down. This led to the forced starvation of millions of Ukrainian citizens, with the death toll estimated between 7 and 10 million, and Stalin allegedly boasting that it was the higher number. Fast forward to 2014, when Russia, under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, would send Spetsnaz forces into the Crimean Peninsula and Donbass, both internationally recognized as parts of Ukraine, to support pro-Russian minorities in these regions. Russia would deploy troops en masse to Crimea and announce its annexation, a move decried as illegal around the world. This would lead to the 2022 invasion termed a special military operation by Putin as a measure of proactive defense against perceived NATO aggression against Russia. Next, we shall look at how these powers are connected by their cultural origins with the Greeks and the Slavs to one another, as well as their respective parallels with the Athenians mirroring the modern Ukrainians and the Spartans to the Russians. The first most obvious connection between Athens and Sparta is, of course, that they are both Greek city-states and that they both speak the same language and share a genetic origin. In addition to this, they also share a unique cultural heritage of some legendary figure being involved in the founding of their respective city-states. For the Spartans, it was Lycurgus who codified Spartan law, while the Athenians claim Theseus, after his mythical adventure in conquering the labyrinth and its minotaur, would go on to found their city-state. Despite their societal and cultural differences, they would use their common Greek heritage as the rallying force in joining forces to oppose the Persian kings Darius and Xerxes during the Greco-Persian Wars. The origins of the Slavic people are still being debated, but the origins of their nation-states were the result of Vikings known as the Varangians settling in the regions of modern-day Russia and Ukraine as they moved south looking for routes to the Byzantine Empire. They would establish the princedom of Kievan Rus, with Rus actually being the Arabic word for Viking. In addition to this regional connection, the religious heritage of the Slavic peoples was the result of a Varangian prince, Vladimir, seeking to form an alliance with Emperor Basil of Constantinople. Prince Vladimir agreed to marry Emperor Basil's sister on the condition that he convert to Christianity. Vladimir would do so, but then also force the Slavic people to convert alongside him, which explains the dominance of the Eastern Orthodox Church throughout Eastern Europe and Russia to this day. The Athenians and Ukrainians are similar to one another in their preference for democratic self-governance, with post-Soviet Ukraine establishing its constitution in 2002 with democratic government in mind. Both would share an interest in maintaining diplomatic relations with their tempestuous neighbors rather than instigating outright hostilities. They would both pursue prudent measures to ensure their independence when necessary. And while Ukraine is not the naval power that Athens was, its unique geographic advantage of bordering the Black Sea presented Russia the challenge of not having free access to a warm water port in the Mediterranean Sea, which would lead to their invasion of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. The Spartans and Russians are both oligarchies that have a history of oppressing their substantial lower-class populations. For the Spartans, the Helot slaves population outnumbered the Spartan citizens 7 to 8 to 1, often more as the Spartan citizen birth rate fell. This, coupled with the cruel treatment of these slaves, would lead to frequent revolts by the Helots. During both the ages of Imperial Russia and the Soviet Union, the peasants would outnumber the nobility in Communist Party membership, but would have their rights substantially curtailed to maintain control and order. For both Spartan and Russia, military brinkmanship is a way of life. Spartan citizens, all of pure Spartan heritage and being male, would serve in the army until the age of 30, with a yearly war waged against the Helots to maintain control of the slaves and a state of military readiness. At the height of its military might, Russia would become a nuclear superpower during the Cold War and continues to possess the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons on Earth. We lastly come to the similar methods of war correspondency, the accounting of these wars by those who witnessed them. Our records of the Peloponnesian War comes from two men who are remarkably similar in many ways. The first was the ancient Greek historian Thucydides, who would provide what many historians since have regarded as the most objective accounting of the war despite his personal background and circumstances. He would die in 400 BC before the end of the war, which is where the second historian, Xenophon, would come in with his work, the Hellenica, which would account for the war until its end. Both of these men were of Athenian birth, both were military officers, and both were exiled from their homelands and would settle in the Peloponnese. Thucydides would be exiled for failing to prevent the city of Amphipolis from defecting to the Spartans, and Xenophon was a mercenary who fought alongside the Spartans in Anatolia. Unlike Thucydides, Xenophon would unashamedly favor a Spartan perspective on the war. In the Russo-Ukrainian War, the front line comes to us in real time, thanks largely to the massive employment of drones and high-definition action cameras like the GoPro by troops in the field. The personal narratives of the fighting are delivered via social media platforms like YouTube and X, formerly Twitter, oftentimes without the filter of mass media outlets and governmental press corps. The competing narratives of the war remain despite the more personal accounting, with Western nations favoring the narratives of the Ukrainian people resisting the invading Russians. Russian state-owned media presents a heavily sterilized accounting to not only its own people, but also the rest of the free press in the world, in addition to employing an army of state-sponsored and independent hackers and bot operators to sow disinformation on the internet and social media platforms. My conclusion is complicated by the fact that while the Peloponnesian War had a definitive end with Spartan victory over the Athenians, the Russo-Ukrainian War, as of the time of this presentation in November of 2023, is still ongoing and uncertain. The Spartans leveraged aid from an unexpected ally during the Peloponnesian War, the Persians, who were once a mutual enemy of the Greeks. While both Ukraine and Russia received considerable material and financial aid from their respective allies, no side has received a definitive collaboration in military forces. As I've analyzed these wars and found their similarities so striking, I cannot help but pose the question: if Russia, like Sparta, receives full military support from another powerful ally, like China or Iran, what does that mean not only for Ukraine, but the rest of the world? Thank you for your time and watching this presentation. I hope it was both interesting and thought-provoking.